really on group dynamics and groups overall. So it applies not only to the treatment setting, but it also applies to really any type of group formation. And so just something to kind of keep in mind as we do this so that this can be used not only in the treatment setting, but whenever you have to do some type of class group project, for example, or have to work within a group. Okay. And so the basic kind of definition to kind of start our 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 journey in understanding group and group development is a basic definition. Groups are two or more individuals that come into personal or meaningful contact on a continuous basis. Okay. And some important aspects of this is you may recognize that groups are comprised of two or more, meaning that even when we do something like couples treatment, we treat it as a group process, meaning that just like in a larger group, we try to make sure that each individual is heard equally, that they both are able to process the information. We, as the facilitator, don't take sides with the husband or the wife. We try to stay neutral and supportive of both. And so just to kind of point that out, the same dynamics that occur in individual in even things like couples therapy is the same that it's in group therapy, and we can even extend that to family therapy. That in family therapy, one of the difficult challenges is making sure that the authority figures, the parents, are not the only ones hurt, that also the children involved in family therapy have the equal ability to speak, to process what they're going through, and that it's just not dominated by the parent figures within the family therapy setting. So those are some examples that people often don't think of as group treatment or group processes, but we use the same things we do with groups with couples and families and the like. So something to kind of think about if you're going into couples and family therapy. I do like to denote the difference between groups and teams because they're not the same. One of the common kind of when individuals are beginning group treatment or going into group therapy is they want to kind of treat the group like a team. Okay. But teams are often one subsets of a group. Okay. And teams have more structure and teams tend to have more goals. Now, I want to make it clear on this. When I say teams have more structure, I mean they have a set agenda. They're off of a mission statement of some type, and they have specific tasks that they need to accomplish. And teams have goals means that there needs to be some type of end product. Now, in treatment modalities, we can have highly structured treatment modalities. And for groups and group treatment, we often have goals, alleviation of symptoms, abstaining from substance use, alleviation of post-traumatic stress symptoms, and all those kinds of things. But the goals are not specific, like generate a document of some type or in the idea of, for example, sports, win the next game. It's not that specific. It's more individualized, and how we reach those goals can be more individualized in a group setting. Okay. So some group dynamics that we should talk about in the beginning is how groups or teams function. And one is group size. And this really is part of something that we consider when we're doing some type of treatment in the group setting. Okay. To The best kind of groups are group sizes from anywhere from 2 to 9 members. Okay. And in the treatment setting, we want to aim for anywhere between about 5 to about 9 participants, unless, of course, we're doing couples or family treatment, because that depends on the family size, of course. But in treatment groups such as addiction groups, um, depression groups, and all those kinds of things, about 5 to 9 is about the right size in order to be effective in treatment. Okay. Now, let me explain a few things, because some of you might be saying, well, AA groups can have sizes of 20 to 30 people. Other types of support groups can have many individuals. And I want to make it clear, while AA and those type of support groups tend to have the same format as a treatment group, we really should think of those as community support groups, not necessarily a therapeutic or treatment group. Because what really AA is about a community of individuals coming together that have common goals and common directions and steps and support. Um, but when we're talking about treatment, going through something, for example, instead of AA, going through something called relapse prevention groups, where we're developing skills and coping mechanisms, this really is more effective with a group size of around 5 to 9. You get below 5, you tend to get, well, usually you only get 1 or 2 of the individuals dominating the group, and it limits kind of the diversity of thought. Once you get above 9 group members, you get a lot of things. We'll talk about social loafing. You get people who don't engage fully in the group. And then again, what ends up happening is the group starts to be dominated by just a few participants, because the number of individuals in the group just becomes overwhelming for the facilitator and for a fully functional group process. So group size is important to kind of consider. I remember when I used to do domestic violence survivor groups, especially the psychoeducational ones, which required a smaller number of people. Sometimes I would have up to 18 to 20 individuals showing up to those groups. And at one time, I actually had 32 participants in a survivor group. And it just became more like a classroom setting than a group process setting. And so eventually, fortunately, the agency hired a few more people, and we broke those groups up to make it more meaningful. And by breaking them up, I noticed that a lot of individuals who used to sit in the back of the room would actually now start to engage in the group and provide their opinion. And that's why it's important to try and keep groups smaller, especially in a treatment, psychoeducational, or process type groups, which are the 3 main ones that we're concerned with in this class. The other thing that we see is group tasks, and this is another part of group dynamics, is impacts of how group interacts. Task interdependence shows how work of one member impacts another, and interdependent rises, members work closer together. One of the benefits of doing group treatment is that often people with addiction issues, depression, anxiety, uh, trauma, all of those kind of areas, think that they're alone in the world, that they're the only ones experiencing this. And they'll talk about family members who says, no, none of the other families have addiction issues. Why are you having issues? And those kinds of things. And they feel very isolated and alone. One of the benefits of a group process is that it allows people to realize they're not alone, that interdependence starts to rise when they realize that they're not alone, and that there's other people who suffer from the similar things that I suffer from. and that I can use this to grow and develop. Okay. Now, we should mention, because all of us kind of know this, if you've ever done a class group project with, 4 or 5 people in the group, usually most of the work is usually done by 2 or 3 of the group members, and the rest kind of lie back and do this thing we call social loafing. Okay. Um, Social loafing within the treatment group process often occurs in treatment groups that tend to be forced. So, court-ordered treatments, those kinds of things increase the probability of social loafing. But also, even individuals who willingly go to groups can often find themselves just kind of sitting back and um, not fully engaging and participating in the group process. Okay. So, but here are some ways to decrease social loafing. And you can even take these to, if you're a leader within a group for a group class project, you can even um, use this in those settings. So some ways to reduce social loafing is make individual contributions identifiable. Okay. This is in the class setting, it's a group and saying, okay, and making it written somewhere or typed somewhere that Anne will complete this, Joe will complete this, Bill will complete this, and so on. And making sure that if you're kind of the leader of that group, that you say, oh, look, Anne submitted her stuff. Let's take a look at it, blah, blah, blah. In the group setting, in the therapy group setting, we do similar things as a facilitator, is we make sure that when someone is done talking, that we identify their contribution. Um, we encourage group members that seem to be disengaged to contribute. Um, and and so we make individuals' contributions identifiable and emphasize valuable individual contributions. Okay. So not only do we make it identifiable, Bill said this, but then we put a value base on it. And this can help us do X, Y, Z. Okay. And then again, keep group size at an appropriate level. Again, for treatment, it's between about 5 to 9 individuals. Um, we could say 2 to 9 because of family and couples therapy. So yeah, at least in the social loafing area. Okay. So these are all ways you can reduce it. One, I make identify contributions and then emphasize their value. Um, and a lot of times, unfortunately, what we end up doing in the group setting is we make contributions identifiable, but then we usually provide some type of negative feedback. So instead of finding the value in it, at least especially in, like, for example, class, we say, well, but what about this? What about that? Shouldn't we consider this? And while that is important, as a facilitator, what I would encourage you to do is before you go into the whatabouts, make sure you identify the valuable contribution of that individual and make that socially known before going into, but what should we consider this as well? Okay. So there's kind of when we talk about this interdependence, so you come into the group setting, you realize that individuals have same issue as you, and so you want to know from them and they want to know from you. This is what we call interdependence. And there's really 3 kind of types, and one is pulled task interdependence. This is when members make separate independent contributions to a group. Uh, so in the class setting, this is where a group comes together and each group member takes a part of the assignment, and then they go out and independently contribute or build that part of the assignment and then come back and um, uh, give their part. This is group perform. And so in this one, group performance is a sum of member contribution. In this case, it's not about the group, it's about the individual member's contribution. Okay. And so, well, anyways, and then there's sequential task interdependence. This is where the members perform a task in a sequential order. And it's hard to, in this situation, to identify individual performance since one member depends on another. Sequential task of interdependence is kind of when you do thinking check-ins at the beginning of a group where you say, one way that is commonly used is you give some quote, and then you ask each group member to kind of come up with what does that quote mean to you when it comes to, for example, your addiction issues. And they go through and you sequentially go through each group member and they provide their interpretation. The difficult part about sequential task interdependence is usually the responses as the group proceeds through the activity is that group members after the first or second one start to interpret their what they think based on the first few answers of the first few members. Okay, and this leads back to some original research that was done by Solom Ash. Okay, and this is kind of important to really understand because it really shows the potential risk of sequential task uh, events. So in Solom Ash's research, he had uh, two kind of flashcards. We'll do A and we'll do B. Try and do this. Okay. All right. And what Ash did in this research is he had individuals come into a room, um, and he'd have 3 to 6 people already there that were what we call confederates of the research. Okay. And in this research, and so what that means is they were working for the researcher. They were part of the research protocol, as you would say. So the only participant is the individual that comes in last. That's the person who volunteered for the research and is the person who uh, did, was who we were interested in, the person we were going to measure their response with. Okay. And what Solamash did is he would go through a series of cards similar to this one. And I hope I got this right. If you notice, the second line is equal to A in this B series. Okay. But what Solom Ash would do is have the Confederates sometimes give the right answer and sometimes give the wrong answer. Okay. What he was interested in is the participants' response at the end after listening to the other group members' um, 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 responses. And what he found is let's say we go through and we have 5 Confederates, and those 5 Confederates said it was lines the last line, let's say line 3. We'll number these 1, 2, 3, which obviously I hope in my drawing is wrong. It's too long. Okay. The question is what would the participant, those 6-1, what would they say? Would this person agree with these 5 individuals, or will they give an independent answer that no, these guys are wrong. It's line two that's the correct one. Okay. And this is where the problem of sequential task interdependence comes into play. Because in this simple task, even though this line is obviously wrong, 75% of participants agreed with the group. Now, furthermore, not only did three-fourths agree with the group, after Ash said, no, you're wrong, and he gave a clear reason why the group was wrong, a third, 33%, argued that the group was still right. Okay. So a third of participants, even after being shown the right answer by Ash, would say, no, 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 our group was right. It's a visual illusion or something like that. Okay. And this is the part to be cautious about when you're doing sequential tasks, when you're going through each group member and you've asked them to process or answer some question, is you always run the risk of later group members just kind of agreeing with everyone else and not being able to kind of use their own experience and their own way of understanding the problem to then answer the question. And the large risk is that even when you, as the facilitator, go well and challenge some of the things that group members say, a third of them will stick to that those first responses and say, no, no, Mr. Facilitator, therapist, social worker, you're wrong. The group said this, and so that must be how it is. So I would caution you about doing it from, let's start with person on the left and go to all the way to the person on the right. Let's do counterclockwise, starting with so and so. Sometimes with sequential task interdependence, it's a good idea to start with an open forum where you ask who wants to go first, because then you're not setting up a sequential task where you're asking to go from one person to the next, where you'll just get higher agreement with what already has been said. Okay. And so those are some things to consider when you're dealing with sequential tasks. The other type is reciprocal task interdependence. This is where work performed by a group is dependent on work by others. Members share information and work closely together. So this is where individuals will provide their experience. And then as the facilitator, you kind of go, who else has experienced something similar? What was your experience with that? And you open that up to have the shared meaning. And the goal is too, though, is to understand how each group member experienced the same type of event. So let's say someone had a relapse because they visited family. Families are a very common trigger for addicts. And going to family events tends to be a triggering event. It's a very common thing among people who suffer from addiction. And so someone maybe gives a story, I went to visit family, and afterwards I got huge cravings and I ended up stopping at the bar or whatever, picking up a 12 pack or whatnot. And that's a very common thing. Um, and so, so you go, okay, has anybody else experienced, visiting family and having triggering situations? And you kind of go through. But the thing is even though that's a common experience, I shouldn't say experience, it's a common trigger, it tends to be experienced differently uh, based on the person's interaction. So, for example, I'll just give a quick example because this was eons ago when I did this. When I asked individuals who had that similar trigger, some said it was because of their experience with their kids. Some said it was because of experience with their parents. Some say it was because of the family dynamics and how they feel the family is so dysfunctional. And so the my point being is though family is a common task, a common thing, it's important with reciprocation that you kind of that you encourage and model group members go, you know what, I hear what you experience and I understand this. This has been my experience with dealing with family issues. So that's kind of the reciprocal part. Um, and so that's something to kind of consider. I do want to go back really quick to sequential tasks because one of the other risks, besides just agreeing, even if your experience was different, one other concern about doing sequential tasks by assigning someone and then saying we're going to go counterclockwise or clock is I do want to warn about you about this is some group members may not be able to see themselves in that situation. And so, as the narrative builds in the group, a group member may say, I don't belong here. I haven't experienced what they experience. I don't, and so they might build this other narrative in their head that, well, I haven't experienced what everyone else has experienced, so I must not belong here. I just wanted to bring that up really quick because that's the other side of sequential tasking. Okay. All right. So for today, I want to finish with processes of groups. And through research, we have found that groups go through this kind of similar process as they move through the development of the group. Okay. And it's called forming, storming, norming, performing, and adjourning. Okay. And groups move through these stages. You can stop at a stage, you can go back to another stage. Um, and the thing to point out is that the faster we move through the process, the better. We find that when groups get stuck or stagnate too long in one of these different development areas, that tends to uh, impede the process of the group, and in the treatment setting can lead to things like relapse or worsening symptoms in mental health groups. So I want you to kind of think about that as a facilitator, is how can I keep groups moving through these different areas of development? Okay. And we can put um, uh, these 5 different developmental phases of a group on 2 continuums. One is degree of maturity. And when we talk about degree of maturity, we're talking about how well developed the group is, how well they work together, uh, how instead of conflict becoming a negative aspect of the group, it becomes a growth aspect of the group. And then we have time, of course, from start to end of the group. Okay. So forming, and we'll go through these and then we'll go into these in more depth this coming Thursday. Forming is when the group is just coming together. Okay. This is when you come to the group setting, it's usually the first or 3 kind of sessions. If we're talking about a treatment group, this is when you're building relationships. This is when group members kind of feel like that they're not alone. Wow, here's other people that have my similar issue or problem. This is when you're really developing some cohesiveness. All right. However, um, this also should bring about what's known as storming, okay? Meaning that group members will start to kind of wonder, well, who is this person? And they may use negative relationship skills to kind of push group members to kind of see how they tick, see how they'll react to different things. I kind of often think about this in when I used to manage crisis shelters, and I'm going to use this example because I think it's kind of a clear about storming. Okay, is and I'm thinking about the children that I had in those groups who came from very chaotic, violent homes where things were constantly unpredictable. And so they would come in and they're like, "Oh, I'm safe, I'm okay." But then they would test, okay? And I can't tell you how many times I've been peed on by a 4-year-old, or I've been hit by a 3 or 7-year-old. How many times I was yelled at, and all of those kinds of things. And this was, in this case, the storming phase for those kiddos. Because what were they doing in that situation is they were trying to predict my response. Because often when they did something wrong in their home, they would be severely punished. They would be harmed in some way, or in some cases, their mother would be punished for it through violence and whatnot. And so, what were they doing? They were testing my reaction. And sometimes it would end up to the extreme level to where, again, I'm using the example of being peed on and hit and all of those things because what they are doing is storming. They're looking for how am I going to respond to them? Okay. Um, and then over time, based on the response, we then go to norming, where we became more of a cohesive shelter setting and things kind of settled down and went into routines and all of those things. Now, going back to the group setting, sometimes it will get that intense, especially if you're working with, for example, groups who do come from chaotic homes. So I can think of, for example, offender groups. You'll see a lot of chest beating. You'll see a lot of, especially if there's mixed genders in it, such as, for example, anger management groups, where a male will make some misogynistic statement just to see how the women would react. And that's a very common thing, for example, in mixed groups. In addiction groups, you'll often see this idea, well, I'm not an addict, they're an addict. You'll see, oh my gosh, or you'll see my situation is worse than you. What are you even doing here? Type of comments. And what are they doing? They're testing. They're testing to see other people's reactions, to see if they're going to respond the same way the world has always responded to them. And this is where facilitation skills become very important. And we'll get into the storming phase again more on Thursday to kind of show some of the skills that we'll talk about when we get to facilitation skills that kind of can help the storming phase go into the norming phase. Okay. The norming phase of a group is when we come now to this common, this is why we're here. We're here for a purpose, and we all want to achieve sobriety. We all want to live without violence. We all want to cope and handle with the diagnosis of cancer. Um, those are just some examples from different types of groups. But we come here now, we understand we're together, and we start to kind of do norming. One way you can see norming is that the group members start to enforce group rules. They start to come in and start the group in some cases, and they really start to take on the character of the different group that they're in. Okay. And then we get to performing. Okay. Performing is then when really we're into the treatment things. Um, uh, uh, the clients are really um, trying on different coping skills. They're reporting on it. They're supporting each other. But this is where they're coming back and saying, I tried this, it didn't work. And then the group tries to then develop another coping mechanism or something like that. And then we have that. Now, eventually, though, what you're going to see is that there's going to be a point where group members have gone over the processes over and over and over. They understand it, and they've come to this point where the group really may serve a social purpose, but it's no longer providing a therapeutic purpose. And this is where you'll start to see performance decline, where individuals just kind of show up and go, "Oh, I went over this over and over. I've done this, no big deal." I will tell you in addiction groups, this is where your mature students, not students, participants who have gone through the treatment process, they've talked about it over and over. This is where they're actually at a good risk of relapse because they're already have processed all of this, and now it's time before they start to lose that motivation to probably adjourn the group and advance them to a process group, which we'll talk about later, or some other type of continued treatment or contact or aftercare plan, so that you don't get this drop in their maturity as far as a group is concerned. So there is a point with a treatment group, especially, where if the group does not end for the client, there's a potential of them going through, again, relapse or increased symptoms or those kinds of things, because the group has become, in their mind, kind of stagnant and kind of redundant. So that's something to kind of keep in mind when dealing with that. Okay. So I kind of want to end here because we've given kind of the introduction to group and the developmental process of a group. And so our next task will be going into the details of each of these different stages and different dynamics. And so before I overwhelm you with that, I'm going to stop our sharing and I'm just going to ask, just on this initial introduction, this kind of idea of group processing over time and defining what a group is, does anyone have any questions about this first introductory part before we go into the deep details where you'll be a little bit more overwhelmed? Does anybody have any questions? If you don't have any questions, please put no in the chat so I know. If you do have a question, put it in the chat, unmute yourself, or raise your hand.
I have a quick question just to kind of
Yes,
go ahead and do a little bit of a brainstorm. For the sequential task, you know how we do check-ins at the beginning of groups? What is a
Brittany.
better way? Because I feel like one of the things I do right now for my group, when I go ahead and I do run it, is I do have them check in. I ask, how are you feeling? Was there any substance use or unsafe behavior? What good coping have you had? So to go ahead and get that group interaction, how else would be a good way to go ahead and do it?
So, Brittany, that is an excellent question. And the first question I would ask, is your group an open group where a person can enter at any time, or is it a closed group where it's a set participants for the entire group?
I It's open.
Okay. So with open groups, it's always good to start. So the reason why we still talk about sequential processes is we'll learn again coming the Thursday and stuff, doing it sequentially in the beginning of a group when you have a lot of new group members, for
Uh-huh.
example. It is good to start sequentially in the
Okay.
beginning, in the forming phase of a group. It's a good idea to come in and say, all right, who wants to start today? Here's your thinking check-in. And they raise their hand, and then you kind of go, all right, let's go counterclockwise. So, and so when you're in that forming phase,
Mhm.
this is why we still introduce the idea of sequential tasks, is because in the forming phase, it's a good idea to have new group members go, oh, I see their perspective. I can, and the goal is that then as we go through the group process, as we get into the norming phase, usually
Mhm.
where the group has become cohesive, and then there may be only a few new group members coming and going. That's when you want to go into more of the open kind of reciprocal way.
Okay.
So sequential has its place, especially when you have a largely new group or
Mhm.
you constantly have group members in and out of the group.
Yeah.
But when you have a mature group that's in that norming phase, that is in the uh, norming phase, that's when you can then start the reciprocal part of it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
That and
thank you.
that yeah, and that was an excellent question because there is room for sequential processing.
Okay. That was my only question. Thank you. I
All right.
appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you for that question. Any other questions or comments? Check the chat here. No, 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 no. No. All right, gang. Well, hearing none. So again, I'm going to start overwhelming you on Thursday. So we'll kind of take it easy for today by going into the weeds of each of these phases of a group. And then we'll go from there. Anyways, so I'm trying to think there was something I wanted to say, but I guess I'll have to write it down. Anyways, okay, let's go ahead and get out of here for today. Thank you for coming to class. I appreciate each and every one of you working on your education and engaging and listening and getting through this group process stuff. And I appreciate any comments that have been made. And I just appreciate all of you. And please take care of yourselves and take care of others. And we will see you all on Thursday, I hope.
All right. Thank you. Have a great rest of your week. See
See
you Thursday.
you Thursday.
See ya.